Welcome to Next Time Around, brought to you by Powerverse, the podcast where we take on the big questions of the green transition and explore how the world is changing for a cleaner, brighter future. We're your hosts, Lauren Forster
and Richard Britton.
And we'll be diving into the tech, the policies and the big ideas that are reshaping industries and people's lives. Whether it's cutting-edge technology or shifting priorities, we're here to figure out what it all means for you and the world that we're building for tomorrow. So get ready as we take a fresh look at how changes today are laying the groundwork for a better next time around.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Next Time Around. Our guest today, Susan Robson MBE, is CEO of the Women's Engineering Society. Prior to this, she worked for 16 years in the engineering industry as principal consultant at National Grid. Susan has been recognised for her work in EDI and gender equality, not only being awarded the FT Heroes Champion of Women in Business, but also awarded her MBE for work in engineering and energy. She has a wealth of knowledge, helping businesses navigate the energy transition through their strategy and innovation. On today's episode, we'll be discussing National Grid and the shift that it's been going through, and we'll be talking about sustainability as it pertains to ED&I. So welcome to the podcast, Susan.
Thank you for having me.
Perhaps we can start maybe by you sharing a little more about your background and what led you to becoming the CEO of the Women's Engineering Society.
No problem. I mean, how far do you want to go back? I guess I've got a background in science. So I had wanted to go into medicine, but I quite quickly realised that was quite hard. So I went on to do medical microbiology. And after completing that, decided I wanted to do a master's because I wasn't quite ready to go out into the big world. So I then did a master's in forensic science, actually at King's next door. So loved that. That was super interesting. In those days, job applications were they were written. So you had to write a form. And the first one I did was the shortest one. And luckily enough, I managed to get that job. So I only ever did one graduate application, which would be unheard of these days. So
a great success rate.
I know. And then I started at what was then Price Waterhouse doing management consultancy. And that was such a fantastic entrance into the world of work because you just work in lots of different clients and you see so many different things. And ahead of that, they give you this intensive training course, which is possibly one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it's probably one of the most formative things I've ever done. So I'll be forever grateful to PW for that. And then after doing 8 years in consulting, I had one child already and I was pregnant with a second. And I realised that consulting was not super friendly towards parents, I'm going to say in general, but probably especially women.
Lots of client projects, I imagine, and spending time in hotels, working
always
remotely.
Working away, yeah, always working away. And that expectation, people always ask me if I've got any horror stories. And I suppose I have got some, and they are of their time, I would say. But I use them as a benchmark to sort of measure how far we have come. I won't go into them now because there were some fantastic things at Price Waterhouse that I did. But anyway, I took redundancy and moved to the Midlands. My husband got a job in the Midlands. And I then started working for local employer National Grid, literally because they were local. But again, it was a story of Susan's career. I slipped into something that turned out to be really serendipitous. So again, really grateful to National Grid for being there when I needed it. And I've had an amazing time there. And then just to do the final segue into the final switch, which is whilst I was at Grid, I got involved in the employee resource group for women. And in doing that, and I think, maybe we can talk about that more later, discovered the wonderful world of inclusion and diversity and started working as a trustee on the board of the Women's Engineering Society. I then took redundancy from National Grid, and it just so happened that the role of CEO at the Women's Engineering Society came up. And so I jumped ship from the trustee board into the role. So again, another serendipitous move.
Amazing.
Yeah. Susan's accidental career.
It was obviously meant to be.
Oh, well, let's hope so.
Yeah, it's a great journey. And also ending up in something that you're passionate about is perfect workplace. So you talked about over the last many years of your career, there's been a lot of change within the business. So could you talk about how maybe the National Grid changed over your time there?
Yeah, I mean, it changed a lot, I would say. When I first went, I suppose having stepped in to it from the 90s world of consulting, which was a little bit nuts, really, and very sort of its time, into an organisation that was basically ex-public sector. It was a bit of an eye-opener, I have to say. But I think that perhaps slowness and maybe, I guess if we were being kind, thoughtfulness around, sort of working in that type of organisation has gradually changed because the organisation has had to change over the 16 years that I was there. I think the consistency has been the presence of really, really smart people and really, really nice people. It's a very warm organisation in general. Obviously, people will have individual stories, but I found it to be a very warm, thoughtful, smart organisation. And so although the sort of culture has changed, it's been a gradual change, and it's been to move with the new context of today in the energy industry. So it was a great place to start at the beginning, but very different, I think, because it was sort of moving out of that public sector piece and more into today's world.
It must have been very interesting to see lots of thoughtful, intelligent people who've been used to a really, I guess, incrementalist culture, because it's a piece of national infrastructure, a vital piece of national infrastructure that you have to be very careful with and manage and modify thoughtfully. And then the world gets turned on its head with the realization that we need to decarbonize at the rate that we are, and the introduction of renewables. And what did that do to, I suppose, the culture of National Grid and everything that's had to follow since? Because I think it was 2014 report, there's been, a huge number of changes over the last decade to start that process of smart grid.
Yeah, I suppose there has been a lot of change in the leadership, except obviously for the John Pettigrew has been a consistency. But he has been very forward thinking. He's very tough in his asks of his leadership, but he has slowly morphed the leadership into one that is forward thinking, one that's very dynamic. And I think that shift has really filtered down to within the business. Again, I'm sure individuals will have their own views on this. That's been my experience of working there. Some really amazing leaders who are very forward thinking, who have great insight into things beyond just working at National Grid for 40 years, although some of those people who are still there are amazing and pivotal. So it takes a mix, I guess.
Susan, you've talked about how the culture has changed over your time working at National Grid. How do you think the National Grid needs to change to be better equipped with kind of how the energy landscape is changing?
Yeah, I mean, that's such an incredible point, because it's just shifted the dial. I can't remember, my colleagues will be laughing now because I can't remember the numbers, but they've got to deliver the same amount of investment in like the next 6 years as they have in the last 40 because of this significant change to getting renewables onto the grid. So, if you think back to yesteryear, we had this grid which was really, it followed the tracks of the motorways because it was largely moving power generated in big power stations to big cities. And now we're shifting to a very different model where we've got a distributed network. We're moving to renewables, which are largely offshore, although some of them are coming onshore now, thanks to Labour opening up some of those pathways. And so to connect all of those new sources, we've got to change the shape of the grid and do very different work. That does mean going into marine environments and things like expanding our portfolio so that we don't find ourselves in these tricky situations where we've put all our eggs in one energy basket. So connecting to other countries where we can trade energy, but just having that massive portfolio that enables renewables to move in. So there's a lot of work to do. And, it's not just about the engineering, it's also about the social scope and gaining buy-in, because we are going to have to cut across some landscapes that are areas of outstanding natural beauty. And that's not popular with the locals. But conversely, people want locally sourced energy that's going to be cheaper for them. So I think this narrative that it's one side or the other is not right, because I think people are starting to change what compromises they're prepared to make in order to live more sustainably and ultimately get cheaper energy.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there with the cheap energy. We saw obviously last year how prices fluctuated significantly, and the consumer was impacted significantly by that. And if we talk a bit more about what Labour's doing, they've talked about being a clean energy superpower, and they have brought in a plan for change to help build a new energy system, about kind of improving the infrastructure and improving that level of connectivity. What are your thoughts on this plan?
Yeah, I mean, it's coming and we've got to do it. And people want to do it. Let's make no mistake about this. I think the way it's being done with smart grids and new apps and tools and things that are helping people make smarter choices, on the face of it are good. You're like, amazing, I can see this, that and the other, and I can make a choice here. I think the difficulty is making it accessible for everyone. So plans that involve us giving people data around using their washing machine at night to save money is all well and good if you've got a normal job. If you're working shift work, you're excluded from those tariffs. And so we've got to think more cleverly about how we make this inclusive. So it's a great start, but we have got to provide something that allows everyone in society to take part. I also find as well that a lot of these tools, people used to come into work and they're like, oh, look at this app I've got, I can go in at any point in the day and look at these things and then I can make choices. I don't know about you, but I want to do less stuff. I want to do less thinking about that. I want this stuff to happen automatically in the background. I want someone else to say, actually, I can tell you're not really using this now, so I'm going to silently turn this off at no detriment to you and then turn it back on when it's cheaper. I don't need more stuff. I don't need more apps. But then maybe it's just because I'm an old lady.
You've covered some fascinating topics there, Susan. And when you mentioned not wanting to always have to think about energy use and have other systems and companies take the strain, obviously that's music to our ears. That's the space that we operate in. But the bit I wanted to kind of come back to was around the inclusiveness of renewables and the changes to the national grid. What comes to my mind is sort of community energy projects as part of that transition and changing the outcomes for people that maybe don't have as much access to opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, there's some amazing stuff going on. I think if you talk to anyone at the sort of behemoth that is Octopus and the amazing stuff they're doing in terms of community initiatives like their fan club where people can self-register to say, actually, the opposite of NIMBYs. They're like, yes, put it in my backyard because that means then I get access to cheaper energy. We can compromise on having the turbines where we live because we then get the benefit of it. And, Labour has opened that up a bit more now, but I think there are still barriers in the way to these community energy projects taking off. And I think it will take the whole community to solve it, whether it's National Grid sorting out the connections, which they're desperately trying to do, whether it's the planning part of it, which takes forever. It's all got to be looked at and it's all got to be solved for this to sort of come together. So it is definitely a wicked problem that lots of interested parties are going to have to contribute to. But I think the appetite's there. That's the positive thing. I think people are realising that they can generate their own electricity through panels and store it with batteries. But it's just, again, making it possible and accessible. I have to say, and this isn't a sob story, but I would love to make my house much more energy efficient and take advantage of some of the things that are on offer. But because I live in a listed house, a lot of it's blocked for me. And whenever I was meeting with Octopus, I used to wang on about this because they would take us round, these sort of, they'd be like, oh, here's some old housing stock from the 1980s. They've got these amazing showcase warehouses where they've got things set up. And it's like, I can't do any of this because of, listing laws. I mean, I'm hopeful that change is coming. And I know some councils are making changes. And I think we can do it sensitively to history without just saying no, without computer says no. So I think there's definitely some blockers there. But I think the willing of the communities are there. So we've just got to make sure we unlock all those little barriers that are still in the way.
Absolutely. So it sounds like there's lots of potential, lots of opportunity at a local and community level. Everyone needs to come together to make it happen nationally and locally. And you're positive about it and must have plenty of experience from that local level in the roles we've been talking about. So fingers crossed, eh?
Yes, definitely fingers crossed. And I just think I love this about energy. I have to say, the last project I did especially, but previous projects as well, engaging with external actors to National Grid to deliver some of these projects. There are amazing people in the energy industry who have brilliant ideas, who want to solve problems, who are happy to have a conversation. And I just can't see us not sorting this all out because of this amazing community that is energy. And it is just a really buzzy place to work, I think. I think sometimes people get a bit bogged down because it can feel like there's so much to go at. But I think, when you get into these communities, the energy industry community and then also the local communities, I feel a bit sad that I've kind of stepped away from it, but luckily tangentially still involved. But it is a great space to be in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's lots of amazing ideas and innovation, creativity amongst the people. And when we talked earlier about the plan for change, I was reading up on it, and the government are changing this first come, first served type I don't know if you heard about it, process where actually it's the first thing in the door gets seen to rather than what's critical for what we need.
Yeah.
And they're refocusing on that. That's really positive. Have you got any thoughts
on that?
It
is. It's a hangover from the olden days where it was first come, first served. And of course, the canny amongst the community spotted an opportunity here and so jumped into the queue. And now there's this mini market of selling their place in the queue has sprung up, which is not in the spirit of things. It's not illegal, but it's not in the spirit of things. And so projects that have not got off the ground are blocking. And actually, the last project I did working in the distribution business at Grid was looking at connections and how do we change this first come, first serve to something that services everyone better.
Susan, a topic that fascinates me, and it would be great to hear your thoughts on it, is the relationship between sustainability as a topic and ED&I. What I see is things like when you can bring some cognitive diversity to solve problems, you get different answers. And by changing the blend of the workforce and making it more equal with hybrid working, you change important dynamics as well.
It is, and I think it's a rich theme for sustainability in the truest sense of the word. So not in the environmental sense of the word, but in the sense of business and societal sustainability. Yeah. Thinking about how energy and utility firms need to fulfill their workforce needs, looking at the sort of massive skills gap that we've got and the intense need for innovation to bring into these new ideas to do things quicker and better and more cheaply. I think there's a number of things people can do. One is have a realistic view of what capabilities you're going to need, and then really understand that what capabilities and skills you had in your business yesterday may not work well for you. So that kind of what got you here won't get you there thinking is to really think again about what skills you need. But then to look at how you're going to source those, because we know that we've got a skill shortage and we know that we've got a massive opportunity for what are being badged as green jobs. But I think any jobs in energy, it just crosses the full sort of pestle gamut, doesn't it? There are jobs that are related to politics and economics and technology, and covering all of those bases to make sure that we arrive at net zero is needed. And I think to fill that skills gap and to bring that innovation into your business, you're going to have to look in different places. And I'm sure you've talked about this when you've had your podcast to do with recruitment, being very careful about the use of AI in recruitment, because quite often AI in recruitment is used to cut down the volume because HR can't cope. And I think a lot of it is based on what's gone before, the formats and the forms and the type of people that you've looked for before. And I think it's very dangerous to not add in that human factor, or certainly to train your recruitment AI, whether that's through large language models or however you do it, but to make sure it's delivering what you need and not what's gone before. It is about good business, and it's about attracting the right talent to your business that's going to bring innovation, that's going to bring volume because everyone's growing, right, in energy, and that you can retain those people because otherwise they'll go elsewhere.
Can you go into a bit more detail as to how employers can make their workforce more diverse?
Yeah, I think the first thing that employers can do is think very differently about risk. So typically when people are looking at hiring new talent, they see someone who's a returner, who's maybe had time out, or someone who's a switcher who wants to switch from one part of the industry into another as a big risk. And I think stopping looking at people like that as a big risk and actually reframing them as a massive opportunity is a door opener to letting some amazing diverse talent and getting to those numbers that you need to grow your business. So I think it's all tied to risk, to be honest. And, whether you're considering, well, we can't let people work from home because we don't know what they're doing. They might be putting a wash on, probably are putting a wash on, but that's fine. Looking, again, not as a risk, but as an opportunity to enable people to do certain tasks from home because they need quiet space, but then recognising there are other tasks that you need to come into the office and work in person with. But I think for me, it does go back to that old school view that those sort of flexible working patterns are seen as a risk rather than an opportunity.
Yeah, we've seen a lot in the news about that recently, but everybody works differently and everyone is productive in different ways. I know I love being around people, but then there's a lot of people who find that very annoying, being around somebody who's very loud and loves to chat. So you've got to make sure it's a workspace for everyone.
I think that's it. And again, it comes back to operating models and setting those guardrails for what type of work is suitable to be done at home and what type of work actually do you need to come into the office and sit with your colleagues and talk about things in a room. And I think once you've set those expectations and they're realistic and people can see the logic of your narrative, you're much more likely to gain buy-in. I think there has been a lot of news column inches around, people resisting coming back into the office. And I can only assume that for the majority it's because they can't see the logic in it and it feels like they're not trusted to work responsibly. And so I think setting out some ground rules and some expectations and basics like having objectives so people know what's expected of them, make it much easier to manage and, you just gain buy-in of the employees and the leadership. I do feel like a broken record, but I do cling on to operating model elements because things do boil back down to having those 6 things sorted within your business. Weaving EDI into those just, makes good business sense to me.
You make some really good points. And maybe another way of looking at it is that the successful, sustainable companies going forward are going to be the ones that compete with the best talent. And who's to say that the best talent can come to the office 5 days a week, 9 till 5 in that kind of old industrial style clock in, clock out system, Maybe these people are in different locations and want to work strange hours, but their contribution's just as strong. And we were talking about culture on the way to the studio today. And I believe I read something recently that said you have a much higher staff retention rate in your culture where you've got a much better blend of people there in terms of, it's more equal workforce, it's more diverse and inclusive. And actually that means people want to stay.
I think that's right. I'm just going to sort of say that there will be people listening to this who are like, well, I've got my workforce. It's not very diverse. We're really successful. And I think what I would say to those people is, on you go. We don't need to convince everyone that looking for diverse talent is the answer to their innovation or their growth problems. If your business works as is and, you're turning the profit and meeting your objectives, then good to go. We don't need to convince anyone. I think the data does say otherwise, but I think pushing out that message, which is everyone must have a diverse team, that's how you get to success, is possibly one that is a bit like a barb in some people's armour. And I think the other thing to remember is not to push the onus on those diverse cohorts of workers. You have to have strong leadership as well. You can hire a diverse team, but if you've got really terrible leadership, they are not going to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of this stuff's not about the proposition of what we should be doing, but it's actually participating in businesses where you can experience the changes and then judge for yourself.
Yeah,
because otherwise people just argue about it forever.
That's it. Yeah, suck it and see, as they say.
Exactly.
You mentioned about how strong leadership is really important and setting objectives. How do you think ESG can drive progressive leadership to help solve the shifts that we're seeing in climate change?
So I think obviously ESG has been a big factor and a changing factor that's sort of suddenly appeared in everyone's business. And I think as it stands now, it's been an amazing starter culture, if you want a sourdough reference in this. So having those separate departments and having targets, everyone's got targets these days. I think that's a great start because it raises the question. and it brings it to the forefront of everyone's business planning. But I think now is the time that progressive leaders will shift away from that and embed it into their operating model. I'm going to say it again because I love the words operating model. And what do I mean by that? So I think when it's ESG, it's very tempting to give it to someone else. So to give it to your chief sustainability officer. And I understand that keeps the focus there. But where it would be lovely to see organisations getting to now is just baking ESG into their strategy, into their strategic execution. So it's everyone's work. It's thought about all the time and everyone's looking at everything with that lens. And I think you mentioned this, Richard, talking about, I can't remember what reference you use, but, when you think about safety and ultimately things like safety come down to having a diverse workforce and making everyone feel included. And once you start looking at safety through the ED&I lens, you become the safest possible because you're just enabling everyone to be safe and making it safe to challenge. So I love what's happened so far, that we've now got focus and transparency. I think what we need to do now is move it and embed it into our businesses.
Fantastic.
Susan, we've been talking about objectives and how leadership are responsible for making organisations successful through the execution on those. I'd love to hear more about the Women's Engineering Society and the objectives that you're working with at the moment to take that forward.
I love that. We watched a bit of the podcast where it's like, oh, you've just published a new book, Susan. Tell me about that. So Women's Engineering Society. So I'm new in role in the CEO, and I'm only interim CEO, but new in role since September, loads to go at. I'm not new to the charity. So the Women's Engineering Society has actually existed, embarrassingly, for over 100 years. But what we do now is basically the same as what we did then, which is a little bit of a lesson in how much we've moved the dial and how much more there is to go. But basically, we're a membership organisation primarily for women who are in engineering. And we kind of have three focus pillars. The first is to support women have fulfilling careers in engineering. The second is to support organisations be inclusive so they can attract and retain talent. And then the third one is a kind of external shape the debate, policy shaping piece where we engage with peers, government, and other industry actors to change barriers that are in the way of making sure the first two pillars are fulfilled. So that's what we do as a broad brush. I've really loved it so far. I love engaging externally, and there's loads of amazing organisations that are doing great stuff, and we're here to collaborate with them. It's been amazing so far.
Thank you, Susan. It's fascinating to learn a bit more about the Women's Engineering Society. Perhaps you could tell our listeners a little bit about one of the initiatives that you've got on at the moment.
Yep, of course. So, I'd love to talk about National Apprenticeship Week, which happens every year in February. So what we do at the Women's Engineering Society is something that does coincide with that, but that continues all year round, but really spotlighting our partners' apprenticeship programs. And obviously, we're essentially a platform business. So we bring inclusive organisations together with amazing talent to bring their apprenticeship programmes, make them more diverse. And so we spotlight the programmes that are available. And we also try and highlight the kind of hidden sources of talent for apprenticeships that people forget about. So you don't have to be between 16 and 18 to do an apprenticeship. You may want to switch careers and do it later in life. And so what we like to do is bring a different lens to National Apprenticeship Week to really open up those opportunities to people who may be thinking about it or who haven't quite thought about it, but it'd be an excellent opportunity for them. So lots on our website around that. So we'd love for people to get involved in that.
That sounds like an incredible scheme that you run each year. And you've really used your platform to be able to take this to high levels. So you've spoken at the UN summit about gender diversity and ensuring that the businesses have the right strategy and plans in place to thrive. So could you talk a little bit more about this and how was this talking at such a high level?
Yep. I spoke a little bit about the amazing energy community, but I think there is also an amazing community in ED&I, very willing to share Some people have monetized it and fair game. I think there are plenty of opportunities where people are willing to come together and share best practice. And I'm always happy to do that. And I think working for a charity makes that really easy to do. When I spoke at the UN Summit, it was with a colleague from National Grid, and we were speaking, Yenny, give her a little name check there. We were speaking about the work we'd done to really professionalise the women's network. And I think this is really important because a lot of organisations do have diversity networks, and they are amazing things. A lot of them struggle with the concept because if they're not set up to succeed, then they can very quickly become talking shops and they're not viewed in the right light by the executive. And so what we shared at the UN Global Compact Summit was what we had done at National Grid to really professionalise them. And again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but what we put in place was basically a mini operating model for the employee resource group. And we took it from a group of about 4 hardworking, well-meaning women into an organisation that spanned about 70 active volunteers with really clear guidelines around what they wanted to do. And we put in all the tenets of an operating model like governance and tied it to business objectives. And I think by putting those things in place, you really get something that's impactful and that your executive will listen to. So it was a great platform to talk to other organisations to really realise value from their employee resource groups. I would say the final operating model piece that's not always there in employee resource groups is recognising people for the work they do here, because it's quite often voluntary. And I remember commenting once on when we were publishing our gender pay gap, and 5 things we were doing to broach that were things that the employee resource group was doing. And I did say, does anyone else find it funny that what we're doing to bridge the gender pay gap is asking some women to do some more stuff for free? And, many organisations do that. And I think luckily, because we were self-organised and we put together a volunteer value proposition that extended outside of getting paid to do stuff, we created a really good offering. But if you don't do that, then people are just doing stuff for free to sort of support the business, do something they should be doing as part of their business. So that's the only watch out. But it's great to have these platforms to share best practice and to hear challenge from other views. So yeah, amazing experience.
Yeah, that sounds really incredible. And it also sounds like your experience has been very vast with using your platform, because you were on The Apprentice as well, weren't you?
I was. As an expert panellist, just to clarify, not as a contestant. I'm sure I'd be out week 1 as a contestant. I mean, that was an amazing experience. It happened really quickly. It was really great fun to film. I have to say, the contestants get really bad press, but I mean, I was in the episode that was the final, and the 2 finalists were absolutely amazing, both young women, and to deliver presentations in the City of London building in front of an enormous audience must have taken some guts. So hats off to them, both very impressive candidates. It was fun to film. I, as usual, used it as an opportunity to build a new network and pick up an old network. And some of the people I met that day, so Suki Sandhu from Ordelis, Ronnie Savage from Jomas Associates, and Scarlett Allen Horton from Harper Fox Partners, I've stayed in touch with, and we still do little bits and pieces together to this day. So always looking for networking.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you very much for being on the podcast today, Susan. It's been great to hear your thoughts and to hear all about your experiences. We really appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming in, Susan. It's been a great conversation. We've really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. I have as well.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Next Time Around. We've really enjoyed discussing ED&I and the National Grid, and the tech and the culture needed to take these changes forward. We hope it's given you something to think about. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn by searching Powerverse, or share it with someone who might find it helpful. To find out more about our software, visit our website www.powerverse.com. Thanks for listening to Next Time Around. Until next time.